duet going out to Europe. In any case, whether or not you've had dessert, you're going to have it right now. Because one of the most delicious traditions, along with scones and Levins's, of JASP is the amateur theatricals, which, as you know, was an Austen family activity. And at JASP, the amateur theatricals have always been based upon Jane Austen's juvenilia, the transgressive pieces that you saw Fanny Price writing last night and reading to her sister Susan if you were at the film. And Adam McCune and Blanche McCune are the people behind the transformation of juvenile prose to theater for us. And every year there's been one of these wonderful offerings.
Yeah.
There's a lot of continuity too in that we have watched Inga's family grow from small laughter onward, and Michele Robinson too, in the cast. To the combination of texts that we're talking about this time, it's the three sisters.
Thank you, lady, for these thy books. They have beguiled the hours, and I'm dismayed the revels now are ended.
Generous and eloquent, Mr. Shakespeare. It is little wonder that we all describe with your descriptions.
That book is not so unlike a play. It hath no more scenery than is needful.
If the scenery is worthy of comment,
Then the players will comment.
the speeches are what matter after all.
Yes, they reveal the soul of the speakers. Every tree is known by his own fruit.
For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh,
And like all good comedies, thy tales end in marriage.
which is happiness for some.
For those who know what's worth having.
Sense, goodness, understanding, principles.
Fine eyes,
Fair, or I'll never look on her.
wise, but for loving me. Yes, and
It is not only about marriage.
no. No, the marriage can be performed off stage, after all.
The heroine grows, she changes, she sees the truth about herself or another person and it changes her.
Recognition, all of a sudden, like the hero in a tragedy.
Like Lear understanding Cordelia, or Macbeth understanding that he will be defeated.
So, Elizabeth seeth the truth about Darcy, and Edmund, the end of his hopes about Miss Crawford. But instead of death, it ends in marriage.
Let other pens dwell on guilt and misery.
Let us see one of thy lighter tales.
Perhaps one about a foolish heroine who does not know what marriage is for.
What do we live for but to make sport for our neighbours?
Man is a giddy thing.
Admit me chorus to this history. Your prologue like, your humble patience pray, gentle to hear, kind to judge our play.
I am the happiest creature in the world, for I've just received an offer of marriage from Mr. Watts. It's the first I've ever had, and I hardly know how to value it. How I can triumph over the Duttons. I do not intend to accept it. At least I believe not.
Stanhope?
He is so plain. So plain I cannot bear to look at him. And quite an old man, 32.
Miss Stanhope?
Mr. Watts, whatever can you want to say to me?
Miss Stanhope, you have not yet accepted my offer.
I am not quite certain.
Not certain?
You know I must consult Mamma, Mr. Watts.
Well, yes, of course. I shall mention it to your mother myself.
I insist you do not.
Miss Stanhope, you know I have a large fortune.
A But so healthy and so stingy.
I do not see that this is a difficult decision to make. I do not think it would be a difficult decision for your sisters.
Sophy and Georgiana?
I'll return later and take your final answer.
That ill-tempered, peevish, I hate him more than anybody else in the world. If I accept him, I know I should be miserable all the rest of my life. I could not bear for Sophy or Georgiana to be married before me. I believe I shall have him. It will be such a triumph over Sophy and Georgiana. Such a triumph to be married before Sophy, Georgiana, and the Duttons. The Duttons will envy me, and I shall be able to chaperone Sophy and Georgiana to all the winter balls. I believe I shan't have him. I would reject his offer at once if only I were certain that neither of my sisters would accept him, and that if they did not, he would not offer to the Duttons. I cannot run such a risk. So, if he will have a new carriage ordered as I like, I shall have him.
Mary, I want to talk to you on a very particular subject.
Ah, I know what you mean. That old fool, Mr. Watts, has told you all about it, though I told him not to. However, you shan't force me to have him if I don't like it.
I'm not going to force you, child. Only, I want to know what your resolution is with regard to his proposals, and to insist that you make up your mind one way or the other, so that if you won't accept him, Sophy may.
Indeed, Sophy need not trouble herself. I shall certainly marry him myself.
If that is your resolution, then why were you afraid that I would force your inclinations?
Why? Because I have not settled whether I will have him or not.
You are the strangest girl in the world, Mary. You say one thing and unsay it the next moment. Tell me, once and for all, do you plan to marry Mr. Watts or not?
La, Mama, how can I tell you what I do not know myself?
Then I desire you will know, and quickly too, for Mr. Watts says that he will not be kept in suspense.
That depends upon me.
No, it does not. For if you do not give him your answer when he returns, Mr. Watts intends to pay his addresses to Sophy.
Then I shall tell all the world that he has behaved very ill to me.
What good would that do? Mr. Watts has been too long abused by all the world for that to matter to him now.
I wish I had a father or a brother, because then they would fight him.
They would be very cunning if they did, for Mr. Watts would run away first. Therefore, you must decide whether to accept or reject him.
But why, if I don't have him, must he offer to my sisters?
Why? Because he wishes to be allied to the family. And they are as pretty as you are.
But will Sophy marry him, Mama, if he offers to her?
Most likely, and why should she not? If, however, she should not choose it, Georgiana must. For I will not let an opportunity escape of settling one of my daughters so advantageously. So make the most of your time. You must settle it with yourself. If Mary won't have him, Sophy must. And if Sophy won't, Georgiana shall.
Poor Georgiana! Sophie, if Mary should refuse Mr. Watts, I shall not expect you to sacrifice your happiness by becoming his wife from a motive of generosity to me. I'm afraid your sisterly affection and good nature might induce you to do so.
Well, let us flatter ourselves that Mary will not reject him. But if she should not, how can I wish my sister to marry someone who I know cannot make her happy?
He will not, it is true, but his name, his fortune, his house, his carriage will. Indeed, I have no doubt but that Mary will marry him. Why should she not? He is not more than 32, a very proper age for a man to marry at. He is rather plain, to be sure, but what is beauty in a man? If he had but a genteel figure and a sensible-looking face, it is quite sufficient. Yes, all very true, Georgiana. Unfortunately, Mr. Watts's figure is extremely vulgar, and his face is so heavy. His temper, too, has been reckoned bad, but may not the world be mistaken in their judgment of it? There is an openness and frankness in his disposition which becomes a man. They say he is stingy. stingy. We'll call that prudence. They say he is suspicious. That proceeds from a warmth of heart, always excusable in youth. And in short, I see no reason why he should not make a very good husband, or why Mary should not be very happy with him. But whether Mary refuses him or not, I am resolved. My determination is made. I never should marry Mr. Watts. Were beggary the only alternative. So hideous in his person, and without one good quality to make amends for it. His fortune, to be sure, is good, yet not so very large, 3,000 a year. What is 3,000 a year? It is but 6 times my mother's income. It will not tempt me.
And yet it will be a noble fortune for Mary.
Yes, for Mary. I shall be delighted to see her in such affluence.
Pray, Sophie, have you any mind to be married?
To be married? Indeed not.
Why should you ask me? Do you know anyone who means to make me proposals? My, no, how should I? But mayn't I ask a common question?
Not a very common one, surely, Mary.
How should you like to marry Mr. Watts, Sophie?
Who is there but must not rejoice to marry a man with 3,000 a year?
Very true, that's very true. So you would have him if he would offer to you, Georgiana. And should you, Sophie?
I would certainly act just as Georgiana would do.
Well, then, I have had an offer of marriage from Mr. Watts.
What?
Pray, refuse him, then he may perhaps have me.
My mind is made up.
I do not like deceiving my sister. If anything can excuse it, these circumstances must.
Oh, here's Mr. Watts come back. Sophie, would you believe it? That old fool wants to have his new carriage just the color of the old one and hung as low too, but it shan't. I will carry my point. And if he won't let it be hung as high as the Duttons and blue spotted with silver, I won't have him. Yes, I will too. Here he comes. I know he'll be rude. I know he'll be ill-tempered and shan't say a single civil thing to me, nor behave at all like a lover. Oh.
Ladies, you're most obedient.
We are most delighted to see you, Mr. Watts.
Fine weather, ladies. Well, I hope you have at last settled the matter in your mind, and will at last condescend to let me know if you will accept my offer of marriage or not.
I think, sir, you might have asked in a genteeler manner than that. I don't know whether I shall have you if you behave so odd.
Mary!
Oh, no, if he will be so cross.
Hush, hush, Mary. Do not be rude to Mr. Watts.
Pray, madam, do not lay any restraint upon your daughter by obliging her to be civil. After all, I'm by no means guided by a particular preference for her above her sisters, so it is all the same to me which one of the three I marry.
Well, I will have him if I must.
Madam, it is my understanding that when settlements such as I've offered to you are offered, there can be no great violence done to the inclinations in accepting them.
What's the use of a great jointure if men live forever? Remember the pin money, 200 a year?
175, madam.
200 indeed, sir.
And remember, I'm to have a new carriage hung as high as the Duttonses and blue spotted with silver. And I shall expect to have a new saddle horse, a suit of fine lace, and an infinite number of the most valuable jewels, diamonds such as never were seen, pearls, rubies, emeralds, and beads out of number. You must set up your phaeton, which must be cream with a wreath of silver flowers around it. You must hire 4 of the finest horses in all the kingdom, and you must drive me round in it every day. This is not all. You must entirely new furnish your house after my taste, and you must hire 2 footmen to attend me, 2 women to wait on me. You must let me do just as I please, and make a very fine husband. And
Mr. Watts, I think that all this is very reasonable for my daughter to expect.
Well, that is very reasonable, Mrs. Stanhope, for your daughter to be disappointed.
you must build me an elegant greenhouse and stock it with plants. You must let me spend every every winter in Bath, every spring in town, every summer taking some tour, and every autumn taking the waters. And if we are at home the rest of the time, you must do nothing but give balls and masquerades. You must build a room on purpose. You must build a theater where we can act plays. And the first play shall be Witches the Band, and I shall do Lady Bloomer.
And what am I, pray tell, going to expect from you in return for all of this?
Expect? Why, you may expect to have me pleased.
It would be very odd if you were not. Your expectations are too high for me, Miss Stanhope. I will apply myself to Miss Sophy. Perhaps she will not have raised her so much.
You are quite mistaken, sir. My expectations may not be exactly in the same line. They are every bit as high as my sister, for I expect my husband to be good-tempered and cheerful, to consult my happiness in all his actions, and to love me with constancy and sincerity.
These are very odd ideas, Miranda. You had better discard them before your marriage, or you will be obliged to do it afterwards. Miss Georgiana?
I think, Mr. Watts, you have mistaken me if you believe I was quite in earnest when I said I expected so much. However, I must have a new chase.
Yes, sir. My daughter has the right to expect that much.
Yes, Mrs. Stanhope, yes. I mean and have always meant to have a new one on my marriage, but it shall be the color of my present one.
I should think, Mr. Watts, that you would pay my daughter the compliment of consulting her taste on such matters.
I cannot agree. I must insist upon its being a chocolate color.
Blue with silver spots.
What if, to please Mr. Watts, it were to be a dark brown color, and to please Marion to be hung rather high with a silver border?
Yes, why not? Indeed, in a spirit of goodwill and compromise.
Well, if you insist.
I suppose. Excellent. You shall be married as soon as the writings can be completed.
As you say, madam. Miss Stanhope, ladies. Good evening, I suppose.
We must be married with a special license.
Whatever is the use of a special license if we're going to be married in our own parish where the parson can simply publish the banns?
What about a common license, Mr. Watts? Then we can conveniently avoid any delay.
I think when they have settled it all, Mary will have neither theatre, nor greenhouse, nor phaeton, but Mr. Watts may perhaps buy her a saddle horse.
Thank heaven, he's off at last. I do hate him.
Don't you know what a wedding this will be?
Provided there is a wedding, all will be quite well enough.
Sophie, Georgiana, come, let us go to Stoneham.
Certainly, but why Stoneham?
Why, so that everybody may know of my approaching wedding. It's such a triumph over the Duttons.
I have nothing else to do.
Only that old fool will consent to have blue with spotted silver. It's Kitty Dutton. Kitty!
Good morning, Mary, Sophie, Georgiana. Please allow me to introduce Mr. Brunel.
That is the handsomest man that I have ever seen. I think we're all three very much pleased with him.
La!
Mr. Brunel is a sort of Brunel of Leicestershire.
I hope you do not miss Leicestershire overmuch, Mr. Brunel.
necessary to have all the jewels new set?
Necessary for what?
For what? For my appearance.
I beg your pardon, I really do not understand you. What appearance is to be made and what jewels are to be set?
At the next ball, to be sure, after I am married.
Married? Is she going to be married?
Oh, yes.
My goodness, and to who?
To Mr. Watts.
To Mr. Watts.
To Mr. Watts!
Well,
I wonder you should not have heard of it before, for in general such things are very well known in the neighborhood.
I assure you, I never had the least suspicion of such an affair. Has it been in agitation long?
Oh, yes, ever since Wednesday. You must know Mr. Watts loves me very much, so it is quite a match of affection on his side.
Not only on his, I suppose.
Oh, when there is so much love on one side, there is no occasion for it on the other. However, I do not much dislike him, though he's very plain, to be sure. We shall have a new post-chaise and very likely may set up a new phaeton. Mr. Watts is to present me with the family jewels, which I fancy are very considerable.
Not very considerable, I fancy.
These new jewels are what I suppose must be new set before they can be worn. I shall not wear them till the next ball after I have been married. If Mrs. Dutton should not go to it, I hope you will let me chaperone you. I certainly shall take Sophy and Georgiana.
You are very good, and since you're inclined to undertake the care of young ladies, I should prevail you to advise upon Miss Edgecombe to let you care for his 6 daughters, which with your 2 sisters and myself will make your entree very respectable.
I should not like to chaperone quite so many.
Mr. Brunel, must you go so soon?
We had best be going as well.
It was a pleasure to meet you, sir.
Pleasure as always.
His face!
And Mr. Brunel, his person,
His manners!
So, Miss Stanhope, you see I'm come a courting in a true lover-like manner.
You need not have told me that. I knew why you came very well.
I suppose we'd better get out of the way. We had best if a scene of courtship is to begin.
Is your courting so soon over?
Courting, we've been quarreling. Mr. Watts is such a fool. I hope I never see him again.
I'm afraid you will. He's dining with us today.
Why, only because I said that I had seen a man much handsomer than him this morning. He flew into a passion and called me a vixen, so I only stayed to call him, to tell him I thought him a blackguard, and came away.
Short and sweet. But Mary, how will this be made up?
Well, he ought to ask my pardon. But if he did, I would not forgive him.
His submission, then, would not be very useful.
Pray, Mr. Watts, think no more of it. The young lady's nerves are likely to be flighty before her wedding day.
Well, Miss Stanhope, perhaps your nerves will be soothed by the news that I am bound for town to hasten the preparations for the wedding.
What preparations? Perhaps a phaeton? Or a greenhouse?
Mary, you will have your little joke. Mr. Watts, I assure you she is delighted to be married. She's been telling all the neighborhood.
Somehow, I think the evening will go off in harmony and ease, nonetheless.
Let us hope the marriage goes off with cordiality and harmony.
Yes. You know, Sophy, a new carriage, being able to chaperone one's sisters, these things would make no amends to us for domestic misery. But Mary, they will form a considerable share of Mary's happiness.
Yes, Mary will have real pleasure in being a married woman. Perhaps Mamma's right. If there is a wedding, all will be quite well enough.
All's well that ends well.